there was plenty of fake it till you make it by the search engines. I mean, there was a large period of time when the quality of their index was more so driven by the fear that they installed in people if you crossed the line. And he rolled it in late on skates, and he got up there and basically said, we don't really worry about spam because our algorithm is so good that, it's not an issue for us. Basically enjoyed it in the Wild West days because it was the greedy. I always have been a fan of the small entrepreneur that allowed them to come in and kick butt and compete with big brand names. Get a kick of watching the new kids talk about things that we talked about 20 years ago, thinking that they just, like, it's an epiphany, right? They just discovered this new thing.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Pioneers. Welcome to Greg Boser. I'm very excited that he's agreed to come on and speak to me. One of the things that I'm most interested to find out, Greg, is how does somebody go from selling fire protective equipment to being a renowned cloaking SEO?
Yeah, that's a wild one. Just by chance, my whole life's been plagued with being a ADHD entrepreneur type wired brain set. So even before the firefighting thing, I had a business where I did auto and aircraft detailing. So that had nothing to do with the internet, but I did that for several years, and then stuff happened in environmental regulations that made it difficult to do that. And then, so the firefighting thing actually happened. There was a big fire in Malibu, California. It was like 95. And I was watching the news, and this helicopter showing this beautiful home on the hill. And there's these three guys out front with the truck, and they're spraying this foam all over the house. And then the fire comes raging over, and they have to go inside, and they hide inside. So these guys are out chasing fires, promoting their product, which was, it basically ran on compressed nitrogen, so it didn't have any moving parts. You could sit at your house forever and ever. But the short version is, if a fire was coming, you could turn this on and spray this protein-based foam all over your house that would keep your house from burning down. And I thought these guys, I thought it was the ballsiest thing I'd seen, really. And they got interviewed, and they got a lot of press. So long story short, I tracked them down, called them up, and said, hey, I'd like to work for you guys. So that's how that started. And so in 95, that area, I was, the internet for me first was CompuServe and AOL. And I'd get on there, and my job was to recruit sales guys to help sell these systems. And there was a lot of retired and semi-retired firefighters who understood the technology hanging out in CompuServe and AOL. So I'd basically go in and spam those forums to try to build a sales team. That was really how it started. And then during the course of that, AOL had this browser thing, and all of a sudden I'm connecting to computers, getting fire research from bushfires in Australia. And I thought, man, that was an amazing thing. This web thing's going to be a big deal. So that led me to, at one point, go to the company and say, hey, I want to start a separate company that carries your product, but also carries more affordable stuff, because their systems were really pricey. And I'm going to build a website, and I'm going to do all this stuff. So got a copy of Microsoft's brand new front page editor, and just built the site and bought all these email lists from zip codes and spam the crap out of them, trying to, get people to the site. And that didn't end up working. And so then it was kind of like, I built it, they didn't come, now what? And in the course of that, I started going online and trying to figure out, I pumped all this money into this thing, and I borrowed money from my dad to do it. And I was like, it wasn't working. That led me to stumbling across Danny's thing, the Webmaster's Guide to Search. He was like a reporter back then, Orange County Register, I think. And I came across that, and I was like, wow. And I started reading, and it was just a pretty basic guide to how the search engines at that time worked. And I started doing the stuff on that site, and all of a sudden I was brokering lead deals with this company from other countries, right? And it was like, wow, this is way cooler than actually doing the work to install this stuff. And so that was it. 96, I just kind of got bit with the bug of being, at that time, it was being a professional webmaster, really. Building sites, and my design skills were horrific. I mean,
Can I just ask you quickly, did you have any prior experience with computer science, coding, computers, or anything?
No, not at all. You didn't. I mean, I still don't. I know enough code to break things. That's what I do. To me, it was always from the very get-go, and still is, a marketing discipline. The original, originally my first company is called Web Gorilla, and that was, I always say the terrorist, not the monkey. It was, but that name came from a book by a guy named Jay Levinson called Guerrilla Marketing. So in my earlier iterations, like the plain business stuff, that was kind of like my Bible for marketing. So I just thought, hey, I'm a guerrilla marketer on the web. So it's kind of ridiculous now when I think about it. But so that's where that started. And like I said, I started with front page. I did end up learning HTML as a result of kind of how bad front page was, but you didn't need it. And I wanted to get online. And so I just learned it on the fly, and then it really kind of hit me. So then when I got bit by the bug, I just started building sites for anybody I could, and they weren't very pretty, but they started ranking for stuff. And so that's kind of how that all, and I just, sat my wife and I said, she was really annoyed. We had young kids, and she worked a 60-hour-a-week job, and I was the stay-at-home dad who volunteered in the kindergarten class and stuff. And she thought I was just like watching ESPN all day. And I was like, no, I promise. I think this search thing is going to be a big thing. And nobody really got it. So I spent a lot of time teaching people, opening their minds to like what the world will be when you can just type a question and get an instant answer. The whole idea of instant knowledge and how powerful that would be. Just I knew that it was going to be a thing. I felt it was, and luckily she didn't divorce me during that time, and she stuck it out. And so I locked myself in a room for a year and just learned all I could learn at the time.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Greg. I was just going to say, I think that what most people don't realize today, and obviously in our industry, it's a very young industry, and there's a lot of younger people who probably don't even remember a time before the internet. I don't think, back then, to try and comprehend that there might be this kind of information portal in your pocket back then was pretty incomprehensible.
I always refer to the people not that I know, that my friends, I call them my NIFs, my non-internet friends, right? That don't have anything to do with this business. And they all thought I was nuts. I mean, they I don't think a lot of them really got it. And I'll tell you what makes this pioneer generation special compared to everybody. It's not really that we're all got great. There's a lot of really smart people that work in the industry today, but we all did something else. Like before the internet started, everybody has these, what did you do before you did SEO stories? That makes it very unique and interesting. We all came from weird places, and some of them had nothing to do with marketing. And most of us kind of stumbled into it. And it was a life-changing event, really.
Yeah.
Where we ended up career-wise isn't where, there was no classes. Nobody went to university to learn how to do SEO. Things like that wasn't an option. Everybody had another path, another thing, and then they ended up in this space. So I always loved, all the stories and stuff that came out of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big part of why I'm actually doing this. I'm fascinated with people's stories. Everybody has an interesting story.
And you got to get it down now while we still remember it, because we're all gummers now. And it's like the memories starting to fade a little.
Yeah, for sure. I'm doing a public service record.
There
and
you
so
are.
You were a sales guy before you got into all this then? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, well,
no, you said you did the detailing, right? And then
so my original plan was to be a rock star, right? So I moved to Southern California when I was 19 years old. Believe it or not, I had long hair. This is in the 80s, and I played in rock bands. I played keyboards in a band, and my goal was to, be a rock star. And I moved down to go to music school, and my wife was pretty much my groupie at the time, right? So we met during that time, and then the whole Nirvana thing happened, and the Hollywood scene died, and there was no work for keyboard players because it was all lumberjacks and playing grunge music in Seattle, right? So I had to pivot, and my thing was I just was never good at working for other people. And really the ADHD thing is really kind of a real thing. And what really attracted me to this business is that even though you kind of do the same thing, each project is a whole new thing to learn, new industry, and that just kept me focused. And so it turned out to be the ideal job for me. But it's like, well, I'm not going to be a musician now what, and I just wanted to be an entrepreneur. I just wanted to carve my own path and be my own boss. And that was kind of the biggest thing. And I had, when the SEO thing started, it was really a lifestyle gig for me more than anything. I didn't ever go down I have a lot of friends that built companies that got acquired, and they went through the more formal. And for me, it was always just being able to, my kids played competitive sports. I coached them in their sports, and we traveled all over the country and did that kind of thing. And I just always wanted to be able to go to all their gigs and do the dad thing. And it was the great job for that lifestyle at the time. So I decided to stick around.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to so back then, 25 years ago, that again would have been something really radically different. I know right now everybody seems to be working remotely, but back then nobody worked from home. Nobody worked remotely, did they? Unless you were stuffing envelopes, right?
I got a kick out of during the pandemic watching my NIFs melt down with having to be with their spouses 24/7. I know people that working professionals that had never, and my wife and I, this industry has been remote since its inception, really. Even back then, we used to fake and pretend we weren't remote because you didn't want clients to know you were working in a spare bedroom. But our marriage survived the pandemic because we are already used to.
You'd had 25 years
always getting on each other's nerves and being around 24/7 and sharing the same, all that kind of stuff. But I do wish. I can remember thinking it would be stupid to buy stock in Zoom because it's such a niche tool. We've been using it forever, and now it's become a verb, right? It's like the Kleenex of video conferencing, and blew up. And so missed that boat. But the working from home and the remote thing was definitely a big part of what made it a good fit.
I think that's what really has made the industry so interesting, particularly, as you say, with the pioneers, the first few generations of SEOs. It really did attract that entrepreneurial, renegade niche type people, just by the very nature of being able to work remotely, being able to work from home, or to, like you say, to carve your own niche, to not have to work in the average 9 to 5.
And to fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
So this industry was the greatest fake it till you make it space ever, right? There wasn't much in real life. It was a very 2D world. And so the personas that people could develop and the images they could project through just email lists and forums and things like that really had an impact on the way things grew. Because if we were all trying to do this in person, it's a lot, it wouldn't have panned out the same way. So a lot of people had to work to catch up to their persona as far as talent and experience. It's just how it was back then.
I don't know. I think there's still quite
everybody on paper had 50 clients, but we really only had 5. You know what I mean? There was a lot of that going on.
I think there's still quite a little bit of that going on today, actually.
Yes, it's still there for sure.
So you were building the site for the fire protection company. That was going well, and you said that you found Danny Sullivan. How did you find Danny Sullivan's site?
Just surfing around online somehow. they probably ranked in a search engine since he was the guy that knew how to do that, right? I don't recall the exact, and it's interesting. So back in those days, like traffic, you spent one more time really just the random surfer model, right? Actually clicking on links. Links were about actual traffic because there really, there was directories, but there really wasn't. It was just the beginning of like algorithmic kind of search. But InfoSeek, that was probably the one that really got me hooked because it was so instantaneous, and that's, you could just test. So basically taking what Danny had written and building sites and scraping other content and using it for R&D testing and that kind of stuff, and just and you could get your results right away. It was like 5 minutes. You tweak a page, you submit it. Oh, it dropped 5 spots. Now what? Try again, that kind of thing. So and that was, and then the funny thing is, Danny turned that into eventually Search Engine Watch, right? And I remember when we first did the subscriber thing, and you had to fax him your credit card number because there was no, online commerce kind of thing to be a subscriber to his newsletter, and then so he'd send out weekly updates, and that kind of really started, in my mind, kind of solidifying the opportunity for this to become an actual industry. So that's when I started stalking Danny, pretty much. I just looked at it and I figured, if this space blows up, Danny's going to be the guy with the matches and the can of gas, right? He's going to be the catalyst that's going to really drive this space. So it'd be good to get to know him. So that's how I ended up on iSearch. Is Danny hung out there, and that's where I always joked that in the beginning, I think there was 20 of us. It felt like, I'm sure there was more, but it really felt like on that list about 20 people trying to figure out and, building the idea of making this a career, really. And at the time, like I said, it was more about being professional webmasters. We hadn't really got to the point. When I finally got to the point where I realized that my design skills were hideous, and real graphic artists started building websites, I couldn't really keep up from the look and feel kind of thing, but my stuff rang. So that's kind of when I moved into the specialty aspect of it, of really just getting away from being, a design shop building websites for, one of the Power Rangers kind of thing back in the day. So, and that was really kind of changed things when I decided to focus 100% on just the SEO aspect of it.
Yeah, Danny has been mentioned a lot in all the people I've spoken to so far, and it seems that he was very much a central key hub back then.
He's our Dalai Lama. Really, he was. He certainly had a huge impact on my career. Things wouldn't have ended up the same way, I don't think, if he hadn't come around and did what he did. So
there was, just on a slight tangent, Mike Green wrote a book in early 2000. I forgot the name. It's Search Engine Marketing. He did a series of interviews at the back. He interviewed Andre Broder from then Alta Vista and Craig Sullivan from Google. And it's really
I have a great Andre Broder story. I got a couple Andre Broder stories. It's kind of fast forwarding, but getting into so he was the most feared search engineer. He was the original spam guy. Alta Vista used to sell this. So when I was doing the cloaking and that kind of stuff, Alta Vista used to sell a search appliance box that was basically the algorithm in a standalone application that you could use to crawl and search for your, at that time, early e-commerce sites and those kind of things. And I got a phone call from a sales guy from Alta Vista. I think I'd filled out a form or something because I was really just looking into getting this box just to try to reverse, just to learn more about how to spam Alta Vista, basically. And this poor young sales guy called me up and asked me what I did, and I started telling him, and he said, "Oh, you know what? We're doing this thing in Irvine. inviting the people that use our search appliance that have these e-commerce stores, and basically invited me to come down there and teach them about cloaking. And I'm like, really? All right. So I go down to the event, and I'm basically showing them how, terrible AltaVista is, and how they can't really index this content with all the dynamic URLs. But so just as I'm getting started, guess who walks into the room? Mr. Broder, right? He comes in and sits down in the back, and I'm just, he wasn't expected. He had just flown in and popped in there, and I was mortified. It's like, oh my God, I was scared to death. And he got so annoyed, he got up in the middle and left. I didn't ever, he wasn't happy that, and I don't know if the poor guy got fired or not, but he wasn't happy that there was a criminal got into the Citadel walls, right? Like, what was I doing on their hollow ground, teaching the stuff that he hates? So, and then later on, when he ended up at Microsoft, and Microsoft hired me as a consultant when they first decided to build a search engine. So I got to go into a room with like 80 really smart engineers, and they wanted me to give them insights on the spamming side of things, basically. So that was like 2004, and he was part of that original group. But he was the original in search rock star guy for sure.
Andre was.
Yes.
It's interesting. Obviously, now you can look back and obviously see what happened and the trajectory of where things went. But when you're actually reading it, and obviously they didn't know what was going to happen, it's just quite fascinating. Right. It's because they, AltaVista really thought that they were going to, well, they did dominate at that time, didn't they, before Google came along and knocked them off?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The biggest mistake they all made was, in the very early days, they had two paths to go down as far as monetization. The one route was ISP deals, where, part of what you licensing to ISP, so it's just kind of bundled in and built in, and they got their revenue from the providers that provided your internet, right? And then they got the idea that, well, you know what, our algorithms are so complex that people will just pay us money to be up the top with banner ads, basically. And then we came along, and I would say our industry is like the parasitic fish on the belly of the shark, right? Like we came along and just disrupted their model, because we convinced people, instead of paying them for the banner ads, pay us and we'll get you listed right underneath that banner ad, right? And so we did have an impact on their monetization plans and how that grew. And so, and then the other thing too is being public. Everybody forgets in the early days, Google was a private company, so they could play kind of by different rules. And when you don't have shareholders to account to, you can do different kind of stuff. And so AltaVista got just very ad dominant. The user experience got to be not great. And then these young kids come along and say, we hate ads. We're not going to have any ads on our site, just blue links. Oh, we're all about just getting you right to what you need, and we'll worry about monetization down the road. And that was such a refreshing thing at the time, because all the engines had really gone hard down this banner advertising kind of revenue model, and none of their user experiences was really that great. So that's really Google's right place, right time kind of thing. It was a weird time, and that, the whole banner ad thing is also really what drove a lot of the spamming back in those days. It was, and that's what people don't get. Like, you read about the old, why would anybody stuff meta tags with words that weren't about what's on the page? And it wasn't business, because it wasn't about, the revenue model was page views, right? And there was a time when, you could join programs that were paying over $100 CPM, right? So it wasn't about converting a sale or any kind of real conversion on the site. It was about just getting an eyeball to view the page. And everything was so focused on on-page metrics that it became, a little crazy for a bit. The other thing too is people forget that, Google's original growth the first couple of years was, kind of a hockey stick kind of thing. So a lot of stuff that didn't work well wasn't seen by a lot of people, right? Because they gradually gained ground. It wasn't like when Microsoft decided to do search engine, the biggest issue they had is like the minute you flick the switch, you have millions of users. So you have to try to fix any potential holes before you go live. Whereas, Google got to fix it gradually as they went along. So when they started, Sergey showed up, he showed up on roller skates to a panel that I believe Andre Broder was on. It was a serious panel talking about what search engines were doing to combat spam. And he rolled in late on skates, and he got up there and basically said, we don't really worry about spam because our algorithm is so good that, it's not an issue for us, basically. And then somebody stood up in the audience and asked him what his opinion on cloaking was. And his response was, I don't really care. If you submit me crap, I won't rank it because my algorithm's good. And if you have content that's in a format that I can't index, I prefer you give it to me in one that I can't. And that moment is when the corporate cloaking, I signed so many clients, and that 2 years later, they had people dedicated to tracking, cloaking was the big, but basically he threw out a challenge to a lot of people who said, okay, cool, and that's really the point when our efforts shifted away from, SEOs pay attention to a search engine when they start showing up in the log files, right? When a good friend who worked at Ask Jeeves for a long time used to always say, how do you spam Ask Jeeves? And I'd say, when you bring me traffic, I'll tell you. I don't know and I don't care because you're irrelevant, right? So, that's when we really started diving into what Google was doing and how it worked and how it might be leveraged to our advantage, so to speak, And I wonder a lot, like if he had not been so brazen and cocky about that approach, I really wonder sometimes like what the impact would be, because a lot of us did be like, okay, because we've been, kind of owning Alta Vista and the other ones for quite a while, and we were confident that we could own Google as well, and we did. For a long time. So
if we go right back to the beginning, can you tell me how did cloaking start?
Yeah, the first time I remember hearing about it was a story about, the browser wars and Netscape. It was Netscape against the evil empire Microsoft, and Netscape was a paid product, right? And Microsoft was just building a browser to give away for free. So the original guys, the stories that were being told is if they would track the IP addresses of Redmond and serve different content on their website about what they were doing with the browser that everybody else saw, to try to, hide and just mess with the Microsoft engineers. And that led to, and then it's kind of drifted into, like in the early days, a defensive strategy, right? So when I very first started dabbling with it, not on any kind of really client level, but it allowed you just to mess with other SEOs, right? Because it was so about source code, it was only InfoSeek thing, that you would submit a page and it would rank, and then somebody come on, copy your code and swap the rank. And so it was fun to do stuff like serve, it must have been Excite, maybe it was Alta Vista. There was a time when Alta Vista had a pretty stiff penalty for excessive meta tags. Like if you stuff the penalty, they demote your site. So, we'd build pages that had a ton of meta tags in it, and it would be different than what we gave the engine. So when people viewing your source code to try to steal your stuff, they steal a poison pill kind of thing. So that's probably really where it started to. And then it had a different advantage because everything was so keyword based and density and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of times what would rank the best didn't read well, right?
Yeah.
So the idea was you built the page for the search engine and got people there, and then you could kind of have the best of both worlds. And it helped a lot too with people don't really understand how limited. I'll never forget the first time I got a client that was an IT technology, it was an IT firm. Well, it was a stop word. IT was a stop word. You couldn't, but nobody searched for information technology, right? So it was issues like that where Google couldn't complete the task. And same thing with synonyms and stuff, like different variations. The vernacular that's used in the actual industry is different than how people search for it. I had a client one time that their industry is called performance improvement. They do stuff to help reward employees and stuff like that. But when you typed in performance improvement, you'd get sites that sold 4-barrel carburetors for vintage muscle cars, right? Like performance, and that's not what people are searching for. So cloaking allowed you to tailor a page for what the searcher was searching for without getting the boss all upset and disbanding all the jargon of the industry that was very important. So things like that is originally how it started. It was a great problem fixer. But my original, the ironic part about how I got into it being a big part of my thing is that really what somebody else cloaking and stealing my client's stuff is really kind of what put me on the map from a public perspective. So in the fall of, I'm going to say 1999, right before the first search engine conference, there was this big deal where the FCC in our country they came out and said, hey, we're going to go after search spammers. And they went after a company in Brazil that had been stuffing adult words in Disney pages or something like that. They were doing stupid stuff. And so fast forward, I had a client in a pretty competitive space that I discovered a competitor that had jacked the content of my client site. And it was a firm, an SEO firm, and they'd actually done it for thousands. They basically go and scrape what pages that ranked well, and then cloak them to the engines, and then bounce the traffic to whoever paid them for the stuff. And so as
this Green Flash?
It was Green Flash, yes.
Okay.
I wasn't going to use names, but yes, it was.
Oh, okay.
And the guy that ran Green Flash was a speaker at the first SES. He was on a panel. And so when I found this, I was a little annoyed, and I thought, hey, what a great publicity stunt would be is to file a complaint with the FCC and release a press release announcing that this complaint was filed and kind of outing this whole situation. Well, that just blew up like crazy. It was, I had lawyers, and it was all this, they were doing work for all the big brands back then, eToys and Barnes and Noble, and they're all the companies that are no longer living, but, and it was really thousands of pages. So I ended up with, on the phone with corporate lawyers, and Danny wrote about it, and he started writing about explaining cloaking. And so I put up a site, Alta Vista deleted all the pages. And then so I put up a site with the kind of the evidence that people could read and learn about the cloaking. And then oddly enough, that generated people calling me going, hey, we want to know more about this cloaking thing and how we could use it. And then when Sergey said it was okay, it just kind of exploded from that point. But for the most part, in the cloaking era that I functioned in, and that more aggressive kind of stuff, is it really wasn't. There's a kind of a myth that I think mostly promoted by Google that there's all these evil SEOs that are doing harm to clients without their knowledge, and that really wasn't the case. The majority of it was either done on personal affiliate sites, or for me personally, like any time we ever did that kind of stuff, it was 100% with the client's knowledge and understanding. And in the beginning, that was the crazy thing. So I did a lot for big corporate entities, right? And then so 1 year, and then a year later, Google changes his mind, says now cloaking's evil, but we've already built it. It already works, it's bringing traffic. So getting those companies just tear, that didn't happen. They're going to keep using it until, and the attitude of the big companies was, if I get caught, I'll just say I'm sorry because I'm so-and-so, right? Like, and to a large extent, that was true, right? The big guys didn't pay the kind of long-term penalties that smaller people did for that kind of stuff. It was a great tool for, we use it a lot for proof of concept kind of thing. So when I decided to get into really the consulting side of it, being a problem fixer, the SEOs that worked with brand new sites and built them from scratch, it was great. They could follow all the guidelines and be all, but when you walk into a big organization that just spent millions of dollars on their site and it's all messed up, you don't get very far with like, we'll tear it all down and build it like this, right? So you have to, in that corporate world, a lot of times proof of concepts was a big thing. And so cloaking allowed us to do that. I could say, all right, let me restructure the site to Google and serve it to them in the way that I think you should build it in the big picture and see how we go. And so a lot of times projects like that would start out not as an attempt to massively manipulate Google, but to prove to the shareholders and the money people that it's worth the effort to do this, right? And it worked quite well, right? It was fun times. In those early days when Google was spouting off, their 90% plus user satisfaction, we had a lot to do with that because we made it possible for them to index, like Starbucks.com never mentioned the word coffee. Back then, Google couldn't, if you didn't say coffee on the page, they couldn't really find it, rank it. So a lot of what was done at that time was to overcome those things. We used cloaking to overcome faceted search, right? Google would get in and just get stuck crawling this stuff that was, the housewife and the soccer mom who's looking for the perfect pair of shoes, and she's clicking all the buttons and stuff. And it works great for that customer, but it doesn't work great for Google. So we just wouldn't give it to Google. We would control that. We use it for canonical work a lot, multiple copies of a site, and we would just redirect Google to where the canonical was before there was a canonical tag solution. So it was a very, very handy tool in a toolbox to overcome. And then as they got better at getting away from what was on the page, it didn't have the ability to manipulate as hard because it was about links and other stuff. So it was really more of a tool to fix broken stuff.
Do you think there's a place, do you think anybody still is cloaking?
Oh yeah, sure. I'm sure it's not as prevalent as it was, but and a lot of it too, it's like the whole idea of we're Google, we're the smartest entity on the world, just trust us, we'll figure it out. I never bought into that. It's like, I'm going to control how my content is presented and what I want you to index and what I don't. And if tools like that help me do that better to where I own that, then I don't have a problem. I never had a problem with doing that. And I will tell you too, that behind the scenes, search engines, context was considered when they reviewed stuff like that. I know for a fact work I did was reviewed by engineers and allowed to stay, right? Even though their party line up front was, no cloaking whatsoever. They had to be very black and white for their FUD campaign, right? To keep everybody in line. But behind the scenes, they understood and I had a conversation once with this actually happened with the canonical tag. So we got invited to Google to talk, and they showed us this idea of canonical tag. What do you guys think of that? My first question is, can I use it across domains? And I basically said, I would be more, this is the kind of, we use cloaking for this quite a bit. And I'd be more than happy to show you what I'm doing, because I'm not doing it to game anything. I'm doing it to help you better figure out what the original piece of content is. And if you allow me, if that canonical tag will work across then I'll give it a shot. We'll try it out and see how it goes. And because, cloaking thing's a lot of work from the point of, tracking the IPs. And if you do it right, you need to do it IP based, not user agent based, because everybody in the world will be peeking at your stuff, right? And the world's full of tattletales, so we'll try to get their claim to fame by ratting you out. So we were fine with having a simpler way to overcome that particular issue, and really big on big sites that do where they have partners, and they give like CNET was one, right, where they had all different partners that had the same copy of their site, and sometimes those would outrank because they didn't really handle the canonical thing. So when the mothership is getting outranked by these affiliate or partner sites, and of course the partners love that, but the way that we would fix it is we would cloak them to Google and redirect Google without the partners being aware that that was taking place, and credit all that to the proper pages on the mothership. That was a big part of the kind of work we used to do, and it worked really well. But it was, it was just easier to use a tag if it actually worked.
So was SES, I believe, was that the very first conference? Is that right?
Yes. So Danny started Search Engine Watch. The first one was, I think, November of '99. And then he did another one that following August. And so I didn't speak. My first speaking one was in Dallas, actually, November of 2000. So, yeah. So the first one or two, there was really just like a couple panels. There was just a handful of people. Marshall Simmons was, he ran the iSearch list. So he was on a panel, Sherry Thoreau and a guy named John Hurd. Talked about he was like the original cloaking guy. Yeah. So when I went to the second conference, it was after this publicity thing with the page jacking. And so at that one, I got a lot of attention. And then that led to Danny, when he started, it was funny that when he first really started expanding into like tracks, he did what he called roundtables. And each table, it was actually a bunch of round tables in a room, and each table had a topic. So you could actually move around to the different, and he had me do keyword research, I think that's what it was. And then everything just kind of blew up from there, and he started doing more shows, more cities, more expanded tracks, and he couldn't get rid of me after that point. So it's stuck around, and that became my only marketing whatsoever that we ever did for our business was conferences. But it was crazy. We'd come home from a show and we wouldn't answer the phone till the end of the week. It would ring and ring and ring. And then each day it'd ring a little less. And then by Friday, it's down to the people that really, really want to hire you. And that's kind of how we just filter down to find the good fit clients, right? And weed through there's definitely a hard scalability for a boutique shop, and how do you find the right clients, the right fit, and that turn into great long-term relationships. And it was just, the phone would ring off the hook, and we pick our 5 or 6 new clients, and we'd be booked up for a year, and there'd be waiting lists and all that kind of good stuff. A little different these days. Not recommended any business management courses you take, but for us, it worked.
So the first conference you went to, did you say that was in Dallas? Was that PubCon 2?
No, that was, I did not go to the first PubCon. And the other thing too about the PubCons is Brett didn't really have anything to do with them. They were organized by the members, and they were really just get together and meet each other in the real world. I did not make it to the London one, but then we did one in Irvine, California, and it was called BarCon. That was the first one in the US. And Brett came to that, but he was not the one that organized it, and it was, I thought we were clever, called it BarCon, because we don't call them pubs, we call them bars. And I'm going to say that was probably February 2002-ish. And that's where I first met like people like Tim Meyer. He worked at Ink to Me back then, and a lot of Todd Friesen, who's a good friend, who was a admin at Webmaster World. So I knew him online, but I became great friends and did a lot of stuff together over the years. And then I think Brett saw the light, and he turned it into and the PubCon thing became a legit thing. And it was great because he started doing them in Vegas in the wintertime, when before that time, Danny would do them in Chicago, and Chicago in November, December is just awful. So I stopped doing that show once Brett had one in Vegas where it was lovely weather, or much better weather at that time. And then they both just took off, and everybody kind of started doing both. And now, it became a pretty, and then when Danny left, just dropped the search engine strategy thing, most of us that had been with him during that time followed him onto SMX.
Did you ever go to any of the early Google dances? So obviously when Google started out,
I went to every single one, I believe. Yeah.
Okay. So
the first one, it was crazy. They had armed guards at the first one to prevent people that worked at other search engines from entering the building. So we used to spend a lot of effort trying to sneak in. Michael Bonfils and John Hurd and I, the thing was trying to swap our badges, more than one time. John always wanted to get in the back and see the engineers' whiteboards and try to get some insight into all that stuff. Because the first one was and that was 2002, their original campus, and it was pretty small. They wouldn't even let the other search people use the restrooms inside the building. They had outhouses, porta potties out in the thing, and you couldn't even get into the lobby for that. So, but those became a lot of fun, Yes, it's funny. They used to keep the engineering guys really under control, kind of locked up. And I'll never forget the first time I was actually coming out of the restroom and I had my badge on and it said Web Gorilla, and there was this older Indian gentleman. He just looked at my badge. He's just like, Web Gorilla, he just knew who I was, and apparently they talked about me, and he was like this closet really fan, and he was so excited to get out and meet the people, and they kind of kept under lock and key though, so it was just kind of a freak thing, but really, really cool guy. And that was just kind of the beginning of when they started letting us kind of interact with the people that were building systems to destroy us, kind of thing. And it definitely changed. It's very interesting because I've had a lot of great relationships with search engine people over the years. And there was I don't know, like a code, but there was definitely both sides benefited from it. By day they're trying to track us down, but also a lot of us in the industry helped Google identify some very big, horrific hack networks and stuff like that. So there was definitely give and take on both sides. And we used to show Matt our spamming tools that we used on other engines, and he always got a kick out of that, right? Because we told him, "Don, we don't use it at Google because it doesn't work for Google, but man, we are destroying Yahoo with this. Check this out," right? And that was typically done in the speaker rooms at these conferences, were kind of like the off the record, place where people would hang out and we have these kind of conversations. And then bloggers came along and ruined that. I won't name names, but there was one particular blogger who overheard a conversation that myself and Todd Friesen and a particular Google engineer were having, and went out and blogged the conversation, So my first words with this person was, what's said in the speaker room stays in the speaker room. Like, why would you be so foolish to destroy a beneficial relationship because you violated that kind of trust and confidence kind of thing? But blogging was a thing. Everybody wanted their 15 minutes. So I kind of messed a lot of that up because it destroyed the trust issue.
What kind of conversations were you having in closed rooms? I mean, obviously, it's like 20 years ago now.
A lot. We would spend a lot of time talking. I mean, we would be pretty open with them with the kind of techniques that were kicking their butt. And the thing is, especially with an engine like Google, they really were driven by public shame for the most part, right? So the biggest thing is they hated getting publicly outed for somebody getting caught spamming them in a big kind of way, right? So they appreciated, I think, if to get heads up on stuff that could blow up like that, and it's like, look, you're trying to come after clients like mine like this, but this is your guys are getting your butt kicked by this particular technique or whatever. In general, it was, good relationship. And the thing is those relationships were nice because when you had a client that had a legit problem, the reality is you could kind of cut to the side of the line. You could get people to look at it. And the rule is you would never reach out to a search engine person for something you were cheating on. It was kind of like the golden rule. Like, if I'm doing something a little aggressive and you catch me and you ban it, so be it. I mean, that's kind of how the game went, right? But a lot of times you'd have really legit problems, and there were accidents. And I had a client one time, and I kind of told him like what to say to his ad reps to get some attention from the engineering side. And then, long story short, the engineering side started helping him with the problem. And then, of course, he mentioned, hey, I work with Greg, and a particular engineer said, that's great. We really like Greg. Next time you talk to him, though, you tell him to stop doing this. He rattled off some stuff that, I assumed he didn't know, some affiliate stuff, just to, always remind me that no matter what, they saw everything. And, to keep you in line. It's like, okay, message received. It was a lot of fun, though.
I think one thing I always find quite interesting is that, obviously, I mean, I wasn't there, but the stories are here, how Google, very much relied on getting input from the SEO industry to help them evolve, and they would
keep your friends close and your enemies closer, right?
But the balance seemed to be very much in the early days. The balance seemed to be very much weighted towards the SEO side, whereas a few years later, that balance suddenly started to turn, and then Google really
definitely
started to
changed
dictate.
when Matt left. I mean, that was when Matt left, the whole vibe changed, and they switched to this. Matt would invest real time and give real long, detailed answers as best he could. It was a tough gig. I mean, the bottom line is you can't always be truthful in that role, right? Like, there was plenty of fake it till you make it by the search engines. I mean, there was a large period of time when the quality of their index was more so driven by the fear that they installed in people if you crossed the line. And they would make claims, made people think that they had all these algorithmic powers that they actually didn't. There was a lot of manual actions back in those days. But it was a very tough, but once Matt left, there just wasn't, I didn't feel like the same level of, he was a very good dude. Like he really always wanted to do the right thing and give you the right answer as best he could. I think the job got harder for him as Google grew. And, sometimes I can remember a time when the story came out by, about a marketing team, one of the marketing team in Google. I forget what country it is, but anyway, they got outed for some kind of spamming thing. And I just told him, I said, dude, you should have called me. You wouldn't have got caught. I could have helped you with that, right? Just poking fun. But he really was a very stand-up guy and really put in the time, and it was fun to do battle with him, and it was fun to, hang out with him. And he made the whole thing enjoyable, I think. And his, I shows the amount of time he would put in and stick around. And the best thing is he didn't drink, right? And so Matt would always show up in the bar and hang out like while everybody else is drinking. And he had a little notebook, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, you'd be talking and all of a sudden the notebook would come out. It's like, oh no, you don't want to be in the notebook. But even there was a lot of fun too. Like one time he was at a show and told everybody that they had tools in his office named after me to help them, track down a certain kind of stuff. And I was very proud of that.
That had to be a very proud moment. Yeah.
Right. It's like, wow, you got a Boser tool? That's cool. I'm all right.
I would be very proud of that.
Yeah. And that level of, I'll call it fun, I guess. It's not there anymore. And the way that people just, this whole idea now that Google has a certification program is just the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. And like, if I could give one piece of advice, it's like, why would you ever hire somebody who has a training certification by Google? That's like, I get arrested for a crime. I want to go out and seek out the worst public defender working for the state to defend me, right? Like, why would you do that? Because none of those people will have any real experience testing stuff on their own and sifting through and understanding what's accurate and what they say and what might not be accurate, And for those of us that did that kind of stuff, it kind of painted a whole different picture of the Google thing, because it's like, you tell everybody that if you just follow the rules, you'll rank. And when people are ranking above you that are cheating, if you rat them out, then the theory was that you would take their spot, but that's not really what would happen. If it was an algorithmic flaw, the next person in line doing the same cheating would take the spot. So for companies to sit there, you walk in and be like, well, you just need to follow the rules. It's like, if you're getting your butt kicked for years by competitors that are cheating, that's not an option. At some point, for a company to survive, they would have to decide to, they did all the reporting, and there wasn't this magic algorithm that would just take your report and fix it. Sometimes cheaters would be in those spots for, a decade, and took a little. And so there was a lot of that going on. It's like companies having to play on both sides of the fence. You have your corporate site that you keep squeaky clean, but you still need to go out and build some properties to leverage these issues, because Google can't really fix it yet, or they haven't, and they're not as good at it as they make it out to believe, and it's not going to get fixed anytime soon. So you need to stay in business. You got to, do whatever you got to do, kind of thing.
I guess it's obviously a very difficult balance for Google, isn't it? You put yourself in their position. They can't openly they've got to play a very careful PR game. They can never really openly say, oh, this works or that doesn't.
I had people explain to me, it's like, yeah, we understand that you might use it properly, but we can't come out and put conditions or say sometimes it's okay, because it's just a lot of idiots will go out and do stupid things. So they always had to have this black and white, if we catch you cloaking, no matter what, we'll ban you for life. And that wasn't really true, especially for the big corporate guys. intent had a lot to do with it. And if the intent was, if you're doing really stupid stuff, then yeah, you definitely pay a price. And if you did get caught, that led to also to a whole re-inclusion work, right? That was another thing I did a lot of. When clients would come to you after they had been banned for something shady they did, and then you try to help them work through the process of getting unbanned. And that was like, I used to always tell them, it's like, you need to treat me like your priest. You need to tell me everything you did, and because if I go vouch for you and they find something that you didn't tell me about, I'm going to tell them to ban you longer, right? Because then you make me look like an idiot, right? So that was a big thing. So we may be doing affiliate work and cheating and pushing the envelope on our own stuff to try to learn more about it. But at the same time, a lot of us in that space did a lot of work to help good clients that misstepped, took bad advice, or a lot of times it was a rogue employee kind of thing, clean up, and so that was a whole subsection of the SEO space. Really, was re-inclusion work was pretty big thing.
How do you think that things compare today to how they were back then? I mean, I see even in the last sort of 12, 13, 14 years how much it has changed.
I mean, 15 years ago, when I was harping on how in the future there won't even be first page results that are organic, and I was often accused of being cynical and extreme, but you can find queries now like that. I mean, it's the little guy no longer has. Now the disheartening part to me is that SEO in a large part now is more about slowing the bleeding, like you're losing more and more real estate on the portion of the page as Google has. It's really kind of, to me, the greatest bait and switch that ever happened, right? So in the beginning, they're like, no ads. Our job is to organize the world's information and get you to where you want to go as quick as possible. And then they went down the predatory aggregation path, where they started getting corporate clients to allow them to scrape their stuff. And I used to say to these guys, like, why would you let them do that? They're just going to track the data, and they're eventually going to replace your content with their own content. Travel software, they bought the engine that powered all the travel sites. Sports data, they went from organizing those information to wanting to own it and control it and keep you on Google and answer questions without ever sending you anywhere. And so now so much of an SEO's job is trying to navigate through those cracks and crevices, like where can I get some visibility in this, like some of the spaces. I still get people that are like legal lawyers and stuff, very competitive. It's like, okay, but the whole page is ads. You're not even going to get, you need to figure out if money that you'll put in to rank as high as you possibly can organically, puts you in a spot that makes it worth it doing that? Or is it just better off in your particular space just to buy the ads? And, it's not I enjoyed it in the Wild West days because it was the greedy. I always have been a fan of the small entrepreneur that allowed them to come in and kick butt and compete with big brand names, and a lot of times destroy those brands because they were so slow to catch on. And there's just less and less of those opportunities now. I mean, it's I like to win, and it's not as fun. And I think anybody now that would get into just the SEO is silly. Like, we used to make jokes about paid people. We called it checkbook SEO, because back when it first started, it was so easy. It was like where people went who sucked at SEO, they became paid people. Well, now it's a super complex discipline that I have a ton of respect for, because I don't like it, and it's very complicated and analytical and data driven and all that stuff. But at the time, it was a joke and it wasn't any fun. And so we didn't really go down that road. But I think now you have to, because like it or not, they're still the big search engine on the block, and it's in a lot of spaces that you have to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really fascinated at the moment watching what's playing out with NFT, decentralization, Web3, and NFT space. I know a lot of people.
I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
And you know what? Because it has it really is like SEO.
Yeah.
It's very Wild West. It's very tribal. It's very, but the idea that we could ever get to anything that eliminates a big corporate middleman, to me, is a great, so that's actually, I spend way more of my time exploring Web3 stuff and rooting for it and hoping that, that's going to be my third act, I think.
Yeah.
Is in that space someplace.
What amazes me is how many people are being so slow. In fact, I probably shouldn't say this because I want to keep it quiet, but there seems like there's a lot of people are being really dismissive of it, and they just think that NFTs are just silly graphics of overpriced graphics. But I think they're actually missing what it really is. Yeah, but the potential, I think they're missing what the actual, the underlying potential of it is.
And to be clear, the 1990s pixel art NFT stuff, I think, is ridiculous. And it blows me away what people are paying for really low grade artwork. But the idea of an NFT for real estate transactions, or like micro purchasing, like the average Joe can invest in a little sliver of an apartment complex in New York City, things like that. That's the stuff that excites me. And I hope to see more of that and a few less Bored Apes, really. I mean, God bless him. He raised $350 million in a day. That's great. But I think in the big picture, the real practicality of NFTs and tokenized ownership of stuff is pretty exciting.
Very, yeah. So obviously we've been talking a while now. I think I'm obviously grateful for you giving me time. We'll just start to wrap up. Just a couple more quick questions. One that I really like to ask is, we've got 25 years distance on this now. So I think we're probably quite safe to ask this, but can you share something with me that you've not shared publicly before about how you got a site to rank? Some like little trick, be it underhand or something that nobody else realized?
Okay, so one time we crawled the entire Wikipedia, and this is before the no follow thing, right? And we cataloged every misspelled 404 domain name, right? And then we went and found all those domains and purchased them and built a whole network of, if the site didn't exist anymore, we'd go into archive and rebuild the site. Basically cloaked an underground network of all of those. It was like 4,000 domains or something. I mean, it was a very large number. It's a very expensive project. So basically Google would come and crawl, and we didn't steal anybody's traffic. So if the site still existed, we click on the link and we take the broken link now because we have the misspelled domain, and we send you to the real site. So if you're on Wikipedia and you're clicking on it, but when Google crawled, we'd let them crawl. And so we had all these sites that were interlinked, kind of sitting underneath the Wikipedia thing, right? And it was this huge network of, what we used to call link juice, right? That you could throttle and point and do stuff with. And it was super, super powerful. So we used that to rank affiliate sites. But then shortly after that, Google talked to Wikipedia and implementing the no follow, and it became less effective. And when all those domain names came up for renewal, it became kind of expensive. But for a while there, it was incredibly, and it was things like that where you could really see people used to always ask me too, is like, why do you still do consulting work when you can make so much money as an affiliate? It's like, well, the big answer to that is when you keep clients and you're getting to push and pull the levers of some of the largest sites on the web, you learn a lot about how Google reacts to the differences in, whether you call it trust or authority or whatever word you want to use. But there's definitely huge differences. And when you come up with strategies like that, you see some of the stuff like eBay did in the past and how just internal linking would dramatically change and shift. So keeping, one foot in that pond was a great thing because you learn so much, but also doing stuff like that wiki project. It's like, it was mind bending how easily it was to manipulate major results by controlling the flow and the connectivity of these sites that were all powered on top by the Wikipedia. Learned a lot.
That's an amazing technique.
Ruined it all.
That's the thing, isn't it? You build something amazing and then it just, one little thing can just switch it all off.
Yeah. But it was crazy to see how much juice Wikipedia did pass at the time, because obviously it's a broken link, it's a domain, so these sites, but we would link them together. So once you got in and started spidering the broken one, you'd get links underneath that cross-linking to each other. And then we had the ability to control and push out links almost like slide levers, right? And so we could take a particular page and say, okay, this is what we want to rank today, and push that in there. And fun times, all for our own stuff though. It was all affiliate driven stuff. It wasn't like shady stuff for a legitimate client though.
A Wikipedia PBN.
Yes, pretty much is what it was. Yeah.
A
secret
Wikipedia
undetectable
PBN.
Yeah. But yeah, when the bill came for all those domain names a year later, it was a big bill. So, and at that point, if we would have come up with the idea like a year or two sooner, we would have made millions. But the lifespan of it was relatively short because of the no follow thing.
So, Greg, last question. What do you miss the most about the early days?
I miss my friends, really. I stopped doing the speaking thing quite a while ago, and then with the pandemic and all that, so I have a lot of good friends that I haven't seen in the real world in quite a while. So the personal relationships to me is the most thing that I miss. It's gotten very stale, and I do get a kick of watching the new kids talk about things that we talked about 20 years ago, thinking that they just, like, it's an epiphany, right? They just discovered this new thing, which is kind of the reason I stopped doing the search. It's like, I feel like you need the enthusiasm of the young kids that believe that they are the first to discover this to keep people interested, instead of, it's like, what, bell bottoms are back in style again, right? When you've been around too long, it's like you see these cycles. It's like, oh God, we're on this topic again. Google has been rewriting title tags since 2009, 10, right? Like, it's not a new thing. But it's better off for the enthusiasm portion for people to believe that it is. So let them roll with it, I guess.
Right. Well, I shall say goodbye now, and hopefully one day I'll get to see you in real life.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Soon. Okay.
Yeah. Take care,
Bye-bye.
Greg. Bye-bye.
Okay, you too. Bye.